Well, the thing that stood out for me the most from this entire experience was the strength and resilience of the females that were interviewed. These women, you see them on the streets walking, and you just think they're average women, but then when they come and they sit in front of you and they start to speak and to reveal themselves, you are totally surprised. So what mattered most for me and what stood out for me was the resilience and the strength of these women.
To me, the light that shines most brightly throughout the project was definitely the people who came forward to help out, in terms of the women who came forward to share their experiences, the children who filled out the questionnaires, the men who helped as well. You know, domestic violence is such a tricky and sensitive topic, and the concern is always with these sensitive topics to actually get the sample size that you want. And for me, that was excellent to see these women coming forward and, you know, with no incentives, just being willing to share their story to see if it can help someone was great. And you know, for projects like this, it's so important to have a voice of persons who would have been through the experience, because you don't want a project out there where people say, but these people had no experience with domestic violence, and that's not the case with this project. So to me, that was the light that shined most brightly throughout this research, the women that really came forward and lent their voices to the cause.
For me, is the extent to which violence in general is embedded in our DNA, and especially with domestic violence, it's almost as if it's encoded in our DNA. That's the thing that stood out for me the most. The way how domestic violence is normalized, justified, legitimized in the discussions with young men. Well, men in general, men seem to think that there was always some justification. Where our position in society should be there's never any justification for domestic violence. That was the main thing I took away from the study, or my part in the study.
In analyzing the data for the EU project, what stood out was the gaps in knowledge from the men and the youth as to what domestic violence actually is, the meaning. Most of them said that domestic violence was physical and psychological, and they didn't really mention sexual and financial, and that was sort of surprising to me. You know, apparently they looked at that, they looked maybe at sex as being a right instead of a privilege, and then they look at men in society that they have to be able to provide for their families. You know, so they mostly stressed physical and psychological, you know, so that was some sort of surprising for me.
A lot of times when I thought of domestic violence, I always see domestic violence as male to female. And in carrying out the interviews, it wasn't just physical abuse that those individuals would have encountered. It was also the emotional aspect and the psychological damage that would have been done to those individuals. So for me, that was the whole light bulb, recognizing that all the different dynamics that go together and what domestic violence means, and is definitely not just the physical aspect where there are wounds that you can visibly see, and for sure is not male to female.
My perspective changed and my awareness of the issue of domestic violence changed. Maybe not me per se, but definitely how I thought about domestic violence has changed, because before this project, yes, I had an awareness. I knew what it was, I knew how prevalent it was. But to actually sit down and listen to persons recount their experiences is something that I never experienced before, because I don't know anybody who's had that intimate relationship with domestic violence that these women would have had, and intimate experience, I should say. And just hearing their experiences, hearing all they went through, hearing their struggles to get out of it, it really opened up an awareness, and it really changed my perspective on this issue, because it's not something that is just that we need to have a forum about and stand up in an auditorium and talk about. It's something that needs action, and that is one of my real hopes for this project, is that it leads to action being taken. So to me, that is what really changed my perspective and my awareness about the issue.
I don't know if I changed really, but what I would say, it imparted a greater awareness in me in terms of the extent to which domestic violence is pervasive in our society. And what I think too is that sometimes we as men often offer justifications as to why we do things, and as I said before, there's no justification. And another thing I thought too is that there's an inherent contradiction in how men see domestic violence. They don't want no one to hit their mother, yet they could understand if a man hits a woman in a situation. So to me, that's another thing that stood out, and that, I don't know if that changed me, but it heightened my awareness of these things, these contradictions in the discussion.
I would say change in that my mindset is slightly different. I am less judgmental to persons who experience domestic violence. Before, I would always say, well, if someone is going through this, why don't they just leave the relationship? But in carrying out the exercises and meeting with the different individuals, I recognize it's not that easy. So change in that I am less judgmental. I am also more sensitive to the needs of individuals who would be going through domestic violence, as well as being in same-sex relationships. And also, I am more open to diversity. So yeah, change in that sense.
I became more aware of what men and youth think about domestic violence. I was always curious about why men batter and what were some of the reasons they did what they did. And by actually analyzing the data and seeing what men and the youth thought about it, it made me more aware of what is going on out in the broader society.
I changed because I had a self-revelation. You see, Ni3 is what we're aiming for, but statistics show that 1 in every 3 women, 1 in every 3 means one household, an entire, because if there's a woman and there's a family, then the entire family is affected. And I realized from this research that I am a representative of that 1 in 3 that experienced domestic violence. My mom was abused when we were kids, and I never kind of linked it to this. And then I had a self-realization moment that I am one of those numbers that they're talking about. So for me personally, it was a time of self-realization that I am one of those families, and it really impacted on me because it was something that burst on me suddenly. And I know it sounds a bit strange that I never linked it, but it only goes to show you then how complex our personalities are and how we behave and think. And so for me, it was an awesome experience.
What I left behind was a piece of jigsaw puzzle for this project that fitted with all the other pieces to create a landscape of the most up-to-date research on domestic violence in the Caribbean. That piece of puzzle was the analysis of the men and youth that I did, and the findings and the themes that came out of it. So I was glad I was able to take part in this jigsaw puzzle and at least contribute a piece to the landscape of knowledge of domestic violence in Barbados and Grenada?
I would like to think that in my discussions with all of the gentlemen involved in the interview, subsequent to our discussions, I think that all of the participants would have been left with a sense of reflection in terms of their actions, in terms of past actions, and also what they may do in the future if confronted with a similar situation. So I would like to think that I left that with them, a pause button, just to take a second to see if the next action I take would be a good action or action detrimental to myself or to my partner.
Connected to what I said previously, I left behind some of my innocence as opposed to how domestic violence affects families. And because then when I realized that my mom was a survivor of domestic violence, and then a survivor in what way, you know, was she able to ever overcome? And you know, as growing up, I could this research kind of brought everything together, and the linkages were explored for me even more, because then I realized why she behaved the way she did after her experiences. So for me, that was a major thing, and that was part of my experience.
I left behind persons who are scared, persons who definitely would like to see services being offered to them that can assist them in coping with the different abuse that they're going through. I left behind persons who not just have been physically abused, but it has affected them psychologically, and the way that they are living their lives is a reflection of what they have been through, and in some cases what they're still going through.
I don't think I left behind anything. I think I took a lot with me. I took a new perspective about domestic violence and a new awareness about it as well. But I was also inspired by these women and their stories. You know, they came out of a very difficult situation. They're not unscathed, they're not unscarred, but they came out on the other side stronger and better than they were when they were in the situation. And as a woman, as a human being, that gives me great courage and great inspiration to see how they were able to conquer their circumstances. So I didn't leave anything behind. I just think that I took a lot with me in terms of lessons and experiences.
There wasn't any one particular person, it was a group of young men that I had a discussion with. And honestly, when I left the area, I felt as if I wish I could take all of them and be their older brother and take them with me and talk to these men more in depth. That's what I really felt. I felt a sense of sadness that these are young, intelligent young men that were already heading down a road that wasn't the best road for them to head down. That's what I felt.
I would have liked to reach out to this individual who would have been experiencing domestic violence from a young age, and I would have liked to be there to more or less not just have a listening ear, but to be there to give that person the counseling that they would have needed, that initial counseling that would have allowed them to more or less have an ease for that discomfort that they would have been going through, and be there for that person that they could share with me in a trusting way what they would have been going through, and for me to offer any services or assist them in finding any resources that would be there to help them. Because based on what that individual has been through and is still going through, the abuse has affected them to the point where their choices in life is determined by that, and they're reliving the abuse every day.
When I was analyzing the data with the men and the youth, they were talking really freely about it. You know, it seems that they were comfortable. I would like to get men and youth in a comfortable setting like that, where they are comfortable to talk and have conversations about domestic violence with them, you know, in terms of educating them about it and making them more aware of what it is, about our culture, what they think are the norms and what shouldn't be, and actually the definition of domestic violence. So informal conversations with the men and youth, you know, in their comfort zone, so that I could educate them and just hear more, so that I could leave something with them. Yeah.
Honestly, I would have liked to be there in some capacity for each and every one of these persons I would have listened to while I was transcribing their interviews, just to be a friend, a confidant, somebody that they can seek advice from, somebody that could just listen. Because from these interviews, you can tell that these are stories that they've shared regularly. These are women who came forward out of the goodness of their heart to share their experiences with people, something that they probably maybe never did before. And you know, the one thing that was evident was that they needed somebody, and if I could have stepped out of my role as researcher, I would have liked to be there for them and help them in whatever way that they would have needed it at the time.
There was this one young lady who was actually, she's the same age or a little younger than my daughter, and while we were being interviewed, while she was being interviewed, the interview took place, she was pregnant. And every time she was while she was telling me her story, I could imagine this was my daughter sitting in front of me. And when she talked about all the experiences, she was molested as a child, she was sexually abused as a child, and there was no support system for her in place. Her parents and her wider community did not respond to her as they should have. And I felt, I said, you know, this could be my daughter, and I felt as though I wanted to take her home. I would have stepped out of my role as researcher and become mother. I wanted to take her home. I wanted to take her home and to tell her, you know, no, that's what happened to you was wrong. What happened to you is abuse, and you shouldn't blame yourself. You are innocent in this whole affair. And I would have taken her home and put her in and created a space for her so that she could blend into my family and she could become one of my own, because I felt so sorry for her. And there was nothing that I could really do at that time because she had already had this experience. So, you know, it's kind of difficult sometimes, because you kind of see that you could have made a difference if you had known, but you know you don't. So that's it. But that's the one that I would have taken home with me and made it all right.
Putting aside the qualifications or the fact that I would have worked with persons who have been abused, and you know, I have knowledge or I am accustomed working with persons in that particular area. Put aside all of that, I think it is my approach and the comfort, my ability to provide that comfort that would allow persons to share their discomfort with me, an individual who they more or less they have never met.
Because I was passionate about finding out about this, I was curious about what men think about domestic violence, you know, and I was so excited about using a new software, the NVivo also, and because of the project manager also and her encouragement, I mean, you know, she made it so easy to contribute and to do this because of the support that was provided. So the passion, the commitment, and learning something new all went hand in hand.
In my opinion, it's less about being the right person and more about being the right person in the right place and the right time. And that is exactly how I came across the project, because I learned about it through a source at the University of the West Indies, and then I was led into it. And I believe that it was something that God led me into. So while I may have had the skills and the expertise to be able to execute the research, my talent was no different than any other researcher, but my participation in this project was God-driven, and He placed it in my lap. And the convenient nature of me being the right person in the right place at the right time was exactly what His will wanted. So I wouldn't necessarily say that Marissa was definitely the right person for this. I was the right person that God wanted in this particular project at this particular time.
Regardless of the work you do, and your level of professionalism, I still think you have to carry a level of empathy in terms of your subject matter and relating to the subject matter. In my personal life, I've seen it, the whole specter of domestic violence in the home. I've seen it personally, I've heard friends discuss it. So it is not a subject that's alien to me, professionally or personally. So I think I would like to think I took a level of empathy into the discussion, not necessarily to direct the discussion, but a level of understanding where men were and where young men were in the discussion.
I want to make a difference in the world, and I believe I'm a researcher by profession, and this has armed me with more knowledge. I have greater awareness of abuse among women. Before I had concentrated, my area of focus is really child protection, but you know, it's all related. These mothers have children, these women are mothers, and for me I think that I was the right person because I love research and how we can use it, because after we've done the research, then how is it disseminated, how can it make a change in society, how can we improve society based on what we do. And for me, these experiences make me an advocate to go out there and to see what can be done, because it doesn't take a whole set of people to change the world. You know, it just takes one or two key people who are armed with knowledge and expertise and willing to come out and to speak up and to make a change. And that is how I see myself as a change agent. And I was very happy and grateful to be part of this process, and hopefully, you know, through my organization, Action for Justice, that we can make an even bigger impact when it comes to violence against women and children and boys too in the society. So I think that I was the right person from my perspective.
This is an EU-funded project.